This is a huge deal. Americans have thought for probably 150, 160 years, it's been pretty well established. Children born on American soil are American citizens. And now President Trump is challenging that.
We're the only country in the world that does this with birthright, as you know.
That actually is not true. There are at least 33 countries that have birthright citizenship. But Trump argues nonetheless that the U.S. is not one of them. So on day one of his second term, he issued an executive order barring automatic citizenship for any baby born in the U.S. whose parents entered the country illegally or who were here on a temporary and often years-long visa. So how will this administration argue in favor of a once fringe theory on birthright citizenship? And how will the ACLU make the counter-argument at the Supreme Court? To understand the issue, it's worth taking a stroll through American history. I really did think I needed a historian. If you're an originalist, you want to know what the founders wanted when they enacted those words.
Let's make Amanda, who's been patiently waiting for us, full screen.
The thing I called you about is, what do we know about what the founders thought about birthright citizenship? Is there any evidence that they didn't want immigrants?
The Declaration of Independence, one of the list of complaints against the king was that his policies regarding naturalization were discouraging immigration to the United States, and they wanted to populate this mostly empty, of course there were Native Americans, but otherwise empty continent.
So it seems the founders wanted people to come to America, but birthright citizenship didn't make it into the Constitution, not at first. That brings us to just a few years before the Civil War, when the Supreme Court issued its infamous Dred Scott decision.
So in the Dred Scott decision, Chief Justice Taney infamously said that no Black person, slave or free, could be a citizen of the United States. Of course, we fought a civil war. The nation rejected that vision. And in 1868, we ratified the 14th Amendment.
Here, we should take a moment to examine the citizenship part of the 14th Amendment, because the meaning of those words is what this case is really about. It says, quote, "All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States." President Trump maintains that the constitutional amendment was intended to be more limited than it's been in practice.
This was meant, when it was originally done, for the children of slaves. And that was a very good and noble thing to do, and I'm in favor of that 100%. But it wasn't meant for the entire world to occupy the United States.
But as Professor Frost notes, the framers of the 14th Amendment did want to include immigrants, even though many of them were targets of great hostility.
I like to remind my students that between 1845 and 1855, approximately 2 million people from Ireland fled to the United States. They were starving. They came in enormous numbers. There was certainly some prejudice and discrimination and xenophobic responses to them, but they were integrated. Their children were citizens. And that's the precedent that we brought with us into this debate over the citizenship clause.
Trump's interpretation of the 14th Amendment is avowedly more restricted, but until now, it's not been embraced by the courts or the legal norms of the country since the ratification of the amendment. And here, it would be valuable to look at World War II. Japanese citizens were held as enemy aliens in detention camps in the United States, but birthright citizenship was so ingrained in the country that their newborn children were still automatically granted American citizenship because they were born on U.S. soil. There have been several key court decisions that have protected birthright citizenship during the past century and a half. Perhaps the most important among these is the case of Wong Kim Ark. He was born in San Francisco in 1873 to Chinese immigrants. He left the country in 1894, and when he returned, he was denied entry back into the United States. Wong challenged the denial, and the Supreme Court ruled in his favor. By a 6-2 vote, the justices interpreted the words subject to the jurisdiction thereof to mean that all children born in the U.S. were automatically granted U.S. citizenship. That brings us back to the Trump administration's argument. Basically, the Trump argument is that the language used in Wong Kim-ark's case assumes that his parents were legally in the country at the time of his birth because they had established a residence here, and there were no requirements for legal entry as there are today. Daniel Epstein is the vice president of America First Legal, the organization founded by the architect of Trump's immigration policies, Stephen Miller.
An individual who is naturally born in the United States is only considered a citizen if their parents have allegiance to the nation. It is a misdemeanor to come into the United States without authorization. If you're committing a crime to come into the United States, that is strong evidence that you don't meet the traditional notion of allegiance.
The ACLU counters that the 14th Amendment is about children, not parents. Cecilia Wong is the ACLU's legal director.
In America, we do not punish children for the sins of their fathers, but instead we wipe the slate clean. When you're born in this country, we're all Americans, all the same.
The Trump administration will also argue that birthright citizenship raises two other problems: a generic potential threat to national security and the problem of so-called birth tourism. So I looked into the numbers, and while there's little doubt that there is some birth tourism that exists, the numbers are really a tiny fraction of births in the United States.
I view just one illegal act as illegal, and birth tourism is illegal, and the law matters.
Texas Senator Ted Cruz is supporting the president's position, along with 11 other GOP senators and 16 House members.
Birthright citizenship is stupid. It is a bad policy. Why? Because it incentivizes illegal immigration. It makes absolutely no sense that someone breaks the law and they get rewarded with a very, very precious gift, which is American citizenship.
So you may wonder, what happens if the court finds in favor of the Trump administration? The ACLU argues that the consequences would be dire.
The president's executive order is attempting a radical rewriting of that 14th Amendment. What will immediately happen is that every month, tens of thousands of U.S.-born babies will be stripped of their citizenship. They may be stateless because their parents' country of nationality may not consider them to be citizens. And so you'll see a permanent underclass of people who have no nationality.
Daniel Epstein counters that those are issues in need of policy solutions.
The policy problem needs a legislative solution, not for the courts to kind of put their thumb on the scale as to how to resolve what likely is going to be a political challenge and a policy challenge.
Translation, a bit of a big mess?
However one defines a mess, there certainly, my view is that it's a mess that you have millions of individuals who came into this country illegally.
Somewhat surprisingly, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops also weighed in with its thoughts on this case. Here's Bishop Daniel Flores.
If citizenship is withdrawn from the children would be the ones to bear the brunt of this removal. I have people asking me this now in my diocese, Bishop, and I'm going to get in trouble if I give food to somebody that I'm not sure of their documentation. Can we help these people? Because we think we need to, because they're people, and they were born here.
Population experts say that if automatic birthright citizenship were to be voided, the consequences would be profound and counterintuitive. The Population Research Institute at Penn State, for instance, estimates that a repeal of birthright citizenship would result in 2.7 million more people living here illegally by 2045. People who previously would have been entitled to birthright citizenship, but now have no such citizenship for themselves or to pass on to their children. In a related case last year, Justice Brett Kavanaugh asked at an oral argument How would a hospital know that the parents of a child are illegally in the country? What would hospitals do with a newborn? What would states do? The answer from Trump's Solicitor General? Federal officials will have to figure that out.